Good morning, everybody. It is Monday, December 11th. Welcome to the Transportation and Environment Committee. We have one item on today's agenda, and that is a work session on Bill 4023, Tree Canopy and Roadside Tree Requirements Fee Revisions, and that is sponsored by myself and current Council President Friedson. And then it is also co-sponsored by Councilmembers Sales, Stewart, Ludke, Albornoz, Katz, Balcom, Mink, Fani Gonzalez, and Jawando. If my math is correct, is that everybody? Almost everybody. And so we had a public hearing on November 28th, and the purpose of this bill is simple. It is to update the fees associated with developments on property here in the county, so that trees can be purchased and planted when they are dug up during the development process. And this is a fee that has not been updated in 10 years, though the cost of trees, just like cost of a lot of things, has increased. And so if we want to maintain our tree canopy and biodiversity, we need to be able to purchase trees for our programs. And that is today's piece of legislation. Ms. Wells, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, council members. Good morning. Yes, this bill is straightforward and simple, but important in terms of making sure that the fees are commensurate with the costs, and that there is an inflation index so that every other year the fees increase, again, hopefully in concert with the costs, so that there's not another situation in which 10 years go by and the fees have fallen behind the costs to the county for the tree programs. Mr. Chair, we do have Mr. Dawson, Ms. Miller, Mr. Dorsey, and Mr. Linkletter from the from two departments, Department of Environmental Protection and MCDOT. Also just wanted to give a thank you to Mr. Orlin for all of his efforts and work on this bill.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say yes, especially express our appreciation to Glenn, to Dr. Orlin for 10 years of stewardship over this program and for recognizing the need to update it. Absolutely.
Thank you. There are a couple of issues, if the committee would like to consider or discuss them. One, I'll just bring to your attention on page 4 of the staff memorandum under issue item number 1. Prior use of the funds, you'll be able to see there are a couple of charts. One's right on page 4, and then one is on circle 33 of your packet that shows the use of the funds since FY18, and you'll notice in particular for the Department of Transportation, their fund did have a balance during FY20, during the COVID years, and since then does not have one. On circle 33, you can see for the tree canopy conservation account that there have been some balances which are expected to be paid down by FY25, I believe, by the end of FY25. And in addition, the Department of Environmental Protection has noted that they hired an FTE mid-year to increase their capacity. The FTE is expected to onboard on January and, increase the capacity and ability to spend down the fund balance. So I don't know if there are any questions about that, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I would actually like to invite up the DEP and MCDOT representatives. I just have a few questions for them. Good morning, good morning. First, let's have you, for the record, if you call, just introduce yourself, and then we could address the questions accordingly.
Brett Linkletter, DOT Tree Maintenance. Richard Dorsey, Chief of Highway Services, DOT.
Frank Dawson, DEP, Watershed Restoration. Good morning.
Good morning, Laura Miller, DEP Forest Conservation Coordinator.
Fantastic. Good morning, everybody. Just want to better understand, I think it was included in the packet, but for the purpose of today's conversation, over the last 10 years, as the cost of trees have increased and the fees have not, what has that done to the tree program? What has it resulted in?
It's resulted in not being able to do the three to one replacement that's actually in the law. You know, trees are around $450 a piece. We get $750. You can plant 1.5 trees for that.
And by law, we're required to plant 3.
Yes.
Has there been a calculation at how many trees have not been planted as a result of not having the funds?
No.
Okay. One other question I have, is there any requirement or guidelines with regards to the trees that are planted that they have to be in certain areas in the property? And I'll be even more specific. Are there any prohibitions to planting them in the right-of-way as opposed to other parts of the property?
So the two different laws have different requirements. For the tree canopy law, they are required to be planted on private property, not on park property, and MNCPPC park property, and not in the improved rights of ways. So they are on private properties, and we do plant the majority of them, about 60%, on single-family homes, and then another 30% or so on HOA properties.
Thank you for that. And within the 60% that are on private residential property, single-family home zoned properties, do we know where within those properties, if they are a majority right-of-way or just in other parts of the property?
They are on other parts of the property. They are not in the public right-of-way.
Great.
And they do meet the requirements that the builders need to follow, in that we need to have 400 square feet of open surface area so that the tree is likely to survive for a long period of time. We do meet that standard. We also meet the same standard that's in the tree canopy law for the size of the tree that the development community would be required to plant. And so they are truly on private properties.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Miller, for that. The reason I wanted to elevate that is because this committee has talked about tree stumps, and I think it would have been problematic if we have a program that encourages trees to be planted in the right-of-way, and then we get into this vicious cycle of not being able to plant new trees because old trees the stumps have not been removed because of budgetary constraints or otherwise. So as long as we are directing the trees, requiring the trees not to be in the right-of-way, I think that is the best thing for not only the property but the community. Those are all the questions I have. Again, I want to express my appreciation to the committee members and to the council for supporting this. Colleagues? Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you.
Vice President Stewart.
Thank you. I just had a couple of questions. I believe in the packet on page 5, the League of Women Voters had suggested a change of reporting on or before March 1st of each year. The directors of permitting services and environmental protection must jointly submit an annual report on the county shade tree planting program to the county council and the county executive. So I just wanted to get your, as the folks who are doing the program, understanding the reporting that's done now and this request.
It's already in the law.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're already doing that.
Okay, that's what I thought. I wanted to
Right.
make sure. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I apologize if it's unclear in the packet. So right, correct. That is a standard under current law. And then the League of Women Voters had asked for a statement to be included in the bill to require periodic evaluation of the sufficiency of the fees. And so I included that provision of the current law just to give you the context of what was already there. And also just noted that since under the bill, the way that it's written, there would be an automatic increase in the fees based on inflation, but in the event that was insufficient, then the council could, by resolution, do a different amount.
Excellent, fine, thank you. I misread the packet, because I
I'm
thought it was
sorry.
in there, that's why I didn't understand it, why I wanted to raise the question. So I guess the question then is to everyone, whether or not the Department of Transportation and DEP find it necessary to add an evaluation of the fees as recommended by the League of Women Voters, given where we were in this process.
I believe at this time DEP is okay with the current proposed language.
Which increases the fee based on inflation.
Right, and I guess I'm
So-
just trying to clarify the question that was posed by the League of Women Voters. If I understand it, it was to also have an evaluation of that periodically.
Right, and there wasn't specific language. They asked that a statement be added to the legislation establishing a timetable for how often the tree replacement rate should be reviewed. And I guess council staff, my view was that, the bill certainly allows for a periodic review in the event. The idea of the inflation is, of course, so you don't necessarily
back.
even need to do kind of
Right.
annual review. It's going to be increasing automatically. But in the event that those increases were insufficient, the council does have the ability to increase the fee by resolution if the inflation is not bringing us up to where we need to be in terms of covering the costs. So there's not a statement in the bill that says, it needs to be reevaluated
Every 5 years,
every 5
every
years
10
or
years.
anything. I'm not sure if it's necessary or helpful to add that language.
So we could certainly include some type of comment on the cost of trees related to the rate in our annual report. I mean, that would be an easy fix to address that.
Great, perfect. I need another cup of coffee because my questions were not clear, so I appreciate it. But that's exactly where I was going, which is what do we need to do so that in the future, even though we're adding the increase tied to inflation, but we also know that might not be sufficient. And so we don't want to end up in the place we are now in the future. And so I think adding that language to the report would be sufficient. So thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. And I had, when I had asked the question about the cost versus the losses accrued over the time, I addressed it to MCDOT, but does DEP have an estimate of how many trees have not been planted as a result of the lost revenue?
We do actually, at this time, it's about 14,000 trees.
That's a lot of trees.
Yeah, about 24,000 trees have been required, and about almost 11,000 trees have been planted using the funds. We do have a little bit more of a balance than DOT has managed, but we have about a 1 year's balance right now. So what's in the fund right now at the end of the fiscal year is what we expect to spend this year.
So just so I make sure we all are aware, 24,000 trees were required by law over the last decade, but only 11,000 were planted?
Correct, and we have funding for approximately 3,000 more, so the fund would be about 10,000 behind.
Okay.
Okay.
Important statistic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Balcom.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate Vice President Stewart's conversation about in the annual report having the cost of trees. I think when we're talking about the process, I think that would be a great addition, just to make sure we're not in this situation again. And then I also think that from the perspective of the street trees, we should keep track of how many are supposed to be planted and how many are planted going forward to make sure that we are planting all the ones that we're supposed to plant. So thank you. But I do, at this point, I first want to thank Council President Friedson. Is he? You want to,
Before
before I go forward?
Yeah. Is that okay?
Please.
Council President Friedson.
No need to yield to me, but I appreciate the courtesy. First of all, thank you for the partnership here. Really appreciate working together with Councilmember Glass on this bill and advancing our tree canopy goals. I mean, that's really what this is about. I want to make very clear that my intention and my goal here, which I think is our shared intent and our shared goal here, is not to generate revenue. It's to protect and preserve tree canopy and hopefully expand tree canopy, because we understand how important that is to environmental sustainability, to healthy living, to improving and addressing heat islands, particularly in some of our most vulnerable areas, and in improving quality of life. It just is a better place to live when you have more trees. And I think that's something that we all want to advance and address. So I appreciate the line of questioning that I was hearing, and I know we'll continue. And I think it should just be along the spirit of ensuring that we are advancing the tree canopy goals and doing so in a way that is reasonable and in a way that reflects the real costs and in a way that we keep up with. Because, you know, if we are going to require a cost of ourselves in certain cases where we have certain road projects or the private sector, then it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we are keeping up with those needs and that we can plant the trees about as quickly as we're generating the revenue. Because if we can't, then we have a problem that we need to address. So really appreciate that. I think this is a significant and positive step forward. Look forward to the thoughtful conversations, and I want to thank again my colleague and partner in this, Councilmember Glass. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. Thank you, President Friedson, for our collaboration. And I've done the math since, and this was supported unanimously by the full council. So appreciate all of our colleagues as well. Okay, back to you, Councilmember Balcom.
Thank you. So I do want to start by thanking Council President Friedson and Chair Glass for introducing this very important bill. I did co-sponsor seeing it as really a correction to the existing law and something that we should have done a long time ago to keep up with inflation. And the indexing will make sure that this doesn't happen again, hopefully. But as the fee hasn't been raised in 10 years, we find ourselves almost doubling the fee from $250 to either $450 or $470 per tree, depending on the program. And while no one wants to absorb a doubling of any fee, the Maryland Building Industry Association makes a good point in their testimony. Builders have entered into contracts under the old structure, and they're now required to pay double the cost. And I know this happens all the time with construction. We face it in the construction that the county does in paying that. But the cost of materials and labor in the construction industry really have skyrocketed. And so I would like to explore the option of phasing in a fee structure. We often find ourselves with conflicting priorities, and we all agree that we must improve our tree canopy, and we also agree to address the rising cost of housing and to improve our local economy. When in the statements that we have in our packet, the climate assessment plan clearly shows that we need this. It highlights the advantage of the bill. The economic impact statement lays out the economic impact that will most likely result and be passed on to property owners and tenants, increasing the cost of housing. So in this regard, I fall squarely on the side of protecting our tree canopy. However, I do support a phase-in to allow the building industry and homeowners to adapt and absorb the doubling of a fee. This bill will most likely not be enacted until January with a late April effective date. The first inflationary adjustment, if I'm reading the packet correctly, would take place July of 2025. That's roughly 14 months between the enactment of the bill and when the fee is set to increase again. I'd like to make a motion that we split the difference into two phases with a $350 phase-in from the effective date through the end of November 2024, and increase it to 450 to 470 starting December of 2024. It took me a long time to figure out that math, so if colleagues need to think about that. It's just basically, instead of a 1 year phase, 1 year of this and the second year of that, it's really just splitting. There's really only 14 months between the time we enact and the time it's set to increase again. So I'd like to make that motion.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Balcom. Appreciate the spirit in which you make that motion, recognizing that we're trying to balance a number of different needs. I cannot support that motion, that amendment at this time, recognizing that we are 10,000 trees behind our goal over the last decade. While it might be a doubling of a fee, it is a very modest $200 or so per tree. And I went on some of our real estate websites this morning just to see what the costs of those properties and those new homes are, the newly rebuilt homes, otherwise known as teardowns, and they're all $2 million or more dollars. And so we are literally talking about a $200 addition for a fee on property that is more than $2 million when we're 10,000 trees behind. And our climate change, the climate change problems here in Montgomery County and in the DC region are mostly with water runoff and heavy precipitation, and we know we need to get more trees in the ground to stem that stormwater runoff and to prevent flooding. And so for those reasons, I won't support the motion right now, but appreciate the spirit. Councilmember Stewart.
Great,
Vice President Stewart.
Yeah, it's okay.
I'll get used to it in a few days.
All right. Thank you. I agree with Councilmember Glass. I appreciate the spirit with which the amendment was proposed, but I think given what we heard today, and I think that it's 10,000, but it's more than 10,000, right? Because we don't know from DOT how many trees have not been planted, and so. And I do think, while 14 months might not sound a long time, given how far we are behind right now and our climate goals, we need to move this forward. And so I appreciate the amendment and the conversation, but cannot support it this time.
Okay. Well, he's not. He doesn't count on the committee. Do you want to speak?
Well, first of all, I appreciate this is an important conversation. I think and obviously everybody shares the goal of the tree canopy, which is the whole purpose here. I guess the relevant question is to make sure that the department has the resources needed to fulfill all of the requests, because that's essentially what we're talking about here. It's a by request process. So I just think it would be helpful, at least for my understanding, because this is going to come up as people ask us about it, to understand from the department what operational impact, from your perspective, of the fund and the ability to fulfill requests as they come in between the failed motion and the bill as was introduced by Councilmember Glass, Chair Glass, and myself.
Excuse me. So last year we spent about $1.5 million, and that would be generally what the revenue would be going forward in this program. So our current staff capacity could manage things at that rate. The only caveat is, at the same time, we've been very successful in getting grant dollars, and we're applying for more and more. So it is possible over time that we may need additional staff to support those initiatives. So for the time being, the answer is yes, we have the capacity.
And so there's two questions here. One is the capacity of the department to fulfill requests. The other is the number of requests.
Go ahead, Laura.
We did have a backlog for quite a few years, and we've recently unburied ourselves from that backlog. However, in this past year in FY23, the number of applications doubled. We're not sure why. If that was an anomaly, we are not going to be able to keep up with that rate, the doubled rate of applications. We will face another backlog if it continues. And this is, I will also add that we have not advertised. We don't put word out there at all, and we're trying to reach out to targeted communities. It's difficult to do with this level of workload that we have, but we don't advertise the program. If the word got out, we would be inundated.
Yeah, so we want to make sure that the cost reflects the real cost. Goal number one, besides the tree canopy overarching. Number two is to make sure that all the funds that are in this are utilized as immediately as possible to actually plant healthy trees in communities to support the goal. I just want to make sure, because it wasn't totally clear based on your comments about the backlog, that that would be able to be fulfilled.
I think there's a slight difference between the funding that we have available to spend and the backlog that we have to move along. I think we can find a balance between those, especially with the incoming dollars from grants that we're accumulating, but it will, I think at the current staffing level with the new position coming on in January, we'll be able to just hold steady. If there's any more available dollars for grants, it will be difficult, and we will face a backlog in applications because as the program becomes more popular, we won't be able to fund all the trees that are requested.
Got it. So I would just suggest that in addition to the cost of the trees as part of your annual report, that you also include detailed analysis of the balance of the funds and the time at which the funds are received versus the time at which the funds are expended. Not just a snapshot in time of how much money exists, because what we don't want is money to be collected in a fund that sits there. This is not intended to be an additional charge on housing that accomplishes nothing. This is intended to be a cost that reflects the actual cost of the tree in order to replace the tree or trees that have been lost. And so I just want to make sure that you include that as well in your report, because I certainly will be intending to hold the department accountable to expending these funds, and I'm sure colleagues would feel the same way, because again, that is the goal. This is not a fund to generate revenue. This is a fund to replace trees so that we can protect and preserve tree canopy.
So a couple of things. One is these funds are dedicated. We can only plant trees with these dollars.
Yeah, I'm not worried about them going to other purposes. I'm worried about them
Right.
sitting there.
And so our challenge was, we had a backlog. We've added one staff person. We're adding another staff person to make sure that we can manage that going forward.
Okay. Well,
And the information that you're requesting is included in the annual report currently.
the bill as introduced is predicated on two things. I just want to be very clear, and then I'll yield back. It's predicated, number one, on reflecting the real costs, which is just a reasonable and fair thing to do. And number two, on our ability to spend the funds that we generate in order to fulfill the goal, which is to plant trees, to protect and preserve tree canopy. So we need to make sure that we are addressing both of those aspects, that it continues to reflect the real cost of replacement, number one, and number two, that we fulfill our end of the bargain, that if we're charging a cost, that we can fulfill what the cost is intended to pay for. And so I just want to make sure that we include that in the report. I appreciate the thoughtful discussion of the committee, and with that, I'll yield back.
Mr. Dawson and Ms. Miller, just want to follow up on the point that Council President Friedson made. The budgetary assumptions that you are referencing moving forward, digging out of the wait list, essentially, right? And being able to provide these services with the new staff and the new level of commitment for these trees. That's based on this legislation passing and these fees being collected. Is that correct?
Yes.
Good. That's all I need to know.
All right.
That we're going to be able to catch up, dig ourselves out of the hole, no pun intended, in order to plant more trees. Thank you. So Councilmember Malcolm, so motion fails. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for your consideration. I do just want to push back a time. I understand and I fully support this bill. I co-sponsored it and looking forward to moving forward. Just pushing back, not every home that that this pertains to is a $2 million home, and we're not talking about $200 on a property. Sometimes we're talking about much more. So I just wanted to push back on that. Thank you.
Any other comments, colleagues? Okay, Ms. Wellens, anything else to address?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to clarify in terms of the amendment that the committee is putting forward regarding the annual reporting. Would you like for staff to return prior to final action with the specific language of, I mean, I certainly understand that the annual report would include the cost of the tree planting and maintenance. So I think, my understanding is you wanted that incorporated. I guess I should just
So there have been a
clarify what
few
you want.
suggestions, some details that are already covered in the report, and some that are not covered in the report. So let's talk with DEP to square away what's not reported, what they can incorporate, and then we'll codify that in this law. Does that work?
Great. And similarly, then, should there be an annual reporting requirement that's parallel then for the roadside trees? Is that part of the?
Well, yes. I mean, is that not? Do we not discuss that in the budget per se when we talk about some of these things? Just trying to figure out what the inflection points are, whether it needs to be a report or whether it is, that line item in the budget that we can expand upon. Dr. Orland. Yeah.
Yes, Councilmember. We can add that language in our report. We collect it now.
Great.
And we'll continue to report it.
Thank you.
Yeah, the way it works in the roadside tree law is that we put in a very conservative amount of money in the budget. It's usually $75,000. And because we don't know actually how much we're going to collect in a given fiscal year. When the fiscal year is finished, they come over with a supplemental for the balance. And they always spend their money. You probably already talked about this. I'm sorry, I had a out-of-town phone call that I had to take, but that's why I was late. But on page 4, you see the balance over time. You see every year DOT spends the money that it gets every year, except for FY20, the COVID year. There was a little bit of a gap, and you probably saw that on Circle 33, what was happening with the tree canopy law, and that they're catching up, and their notes saying that they'll be finished catching up by the end of FY25.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Orland. Yeah, Councilmember.
I just wanted to clarify. So for me, I think in the street trees, looking at a similar analysis of how many trees were removed and how many trees were replaced, and whether there's a delta, I think that's really important, if that's doable.
Excuse me. We have actually been removing more than we're planting. The difference, I think, is that the trees we're removing are dead or hazardous, and that you don't need to replace those. Those aren't part of a replacement plan. Like for the state, we're not required to do any replacement, but we still plant 2,500 trees, 23 to 2,500 trees a year, and it just depends on the size of the trees that we took out in a certain fiscal year, depending on how many that we have as a total. It could be 2,300, it could be 2,700. So it fluctuates.
I appreciate that. I think for my purposes, it would be the trees that developers take down in the process of their building, and to make sure that we're tracking that program specifically, not necessarily all the trees that are taken down.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I was talking overarching of the
Right.
whole thing. Yes,
Yeah.
we definitely, all the money that we get from the street tree law, every bit of that gets planted, and it has been 1.5 trees to 1, and now it'll be 3 to 1.
Ms. Wellens, are you clear on the direction for when this goes to full council?
Candidly, no.
Okay.
I just,
So let's
like
connect with DEP. We
Okay.
will review their annual report
Okay.
and determine the data points that are not included in it, but data we know that they have, which has been asked here, and we'll just make sure that that is included. And DOT will include the data they admitted they have in their transmittal as well.
okay.
Whether or not that
In
has
there.
to be codified in the law, we have a week or so to figure that out.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? No. Okay. Colleagues, all those in favor of moving Bill 4023? That's unanimous. DOT, DEP, thank you. Dr. Orlin,
Thank you.
thank you. And Ms. Wellens, of course. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Because we only do this once a year. So I will sign the paperwork and, it's up to the SSL coordinator at the student's school if they decide to approve it.
Well, you definitely should come through the volunteer center, submit a request, because even though you're just doing an event as opposed to a year-round thing, students can get SSL out